for any amount of time, your job, your purpose, your opportunity, your privilege is to make the other side better off because you were in their life. Even if it's just listening, even if it's a smile.
You're watching Young and Profiting Podcast on YouTube. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Hala Taha, and on Young and Profiting Podcast, we investigate a new topic each week and interview some of the brightest minds in the world. Before we get started, hit the subscribe button and don't forget to click the bell icon to be notified every time we drop a new video.
Hi, Jay. Welcome to Young and Profiting Podcast.
Thank you very much. I'm tickled and flattered to be here. I hope we'll have a lot of fun together.
I am so excited. I mean, I've been studying you for the last week, and I'm so impressed with everything that you've done. You've worked with stars like Daymond, John. You've been the man behind things like Icy Hot. You are just such an expert in so many different things, and I can't wait to pick your brain. But first, I want to take it way back. I want to start off when you were 18 years old. That's when you actually started as an entrepreneur. You're, in your 70s now, so you've been doing it for decades and decades.
Long time, very long time.
But why did you, decide to be an entrepreneur straight out the gate? Talk to us about that.
Pretty unemployable. I got started at 18 because I was married and I had 2 kids at 20 and no negotiable skill I don't have. I'm not saying it with pride. I have no formal education. And I had the need of somebody 40 when I was 18 and nobody cared. And the only people that would give me opportunity were crazy, but very impressive entrepreneurs in my city, Indianapolis, where I was born and raised. And they would never give me a salary, but they'd give me a chair and maybe a desk or a table and so much for every sale I made, or so much for every new distribution source I generated, and so much for every lead I brought in, or whatever the correlation was. And I was never paid a fixed salary. So I was always doing 2 to 5 things concurrently to pay the rent. And when you only eat when you earn, you figure out very quickly what works and what doesn't, and more specifically, what works better. And then if you're pragmatic, you default towards that. And as I was doing it, last thing I'll say, and it gets probably to something you'll ask me, I jumped around not from business to business, but industry to industry. And as I did so, I made a profoundly valuable for myself and hopefully for the business world discovery and realization that people in one industry pretty much follow the herd. They do plus or minus, 10, 20, 30% better or worse, what everybody else does the same way. But if you experience lots of unrelated industries, you see a broad spectrum of alternative ways to market, sell, distribute. You see different strategies, business models, value propositions, lead generation, conversion, access vehicles. And I figured out quite accidentally that I could borrow success approaches from outside an industry, migrate them to an industry that was unfamiliar, maybe borrow 2 or 3 and turn them into a unique hybrid. And it would just explode the businesses that I was then associated with off the chart. And they all thought I was so brilliant. And truthfully, I was nothing more than a masterful, I guess you'd call me an importer. I just imported approaches and concepts from outside. And then fast forward, and you're not asking, but I'll give you a little prelude to current. I realized that the concept of best practices, as it's taught most of the time, even today, is relatively flawed because it tends to be the best practices in a given industry, not necessarily the highest, best, fastest, safest, most high residual generating actions and alternatives. It just tends to be the best practices that everybody else is following, and they tend to be more linear and more incremental in their yield than exponential. And I started really getting serious about that years ago, and it sort of evolved. That's a bigger answer than you wanted, but I hope it was useful.
Super useful. Don't worry about it. You could talk as long as you want on this podcast. I'll always kind of steer you back into the right direction. So if we want to just focus a little bit about that time when you were basically getting all these experiences, you were freelancing. You mentioned that you didn't get any formal business training. You didn't go to college. You didn't go to grad school. But when I was reading your work, I literally felt like I was getting a refresher from my MBA. And I felt I was like reading the textbooks that I read during my MBA. And it just goes to show that you don't need formal education to understand business. So I do want to talk about that a little bit. Like, what is the importance of getting experience?
It is omni-important. I don't know if you've read the book. I read it a couple of years ago, Range. Have you read that?
No.
So it was a bestseller for a year or two. And it's a guy that studied high performance today. And he found out that the people that had the most expansive, diverse, experiential and empirical background were much higher performers today than specialists, because they had the context of understanding of a broad spectrum of scenarios, probabilities, outcomes that allow them to deal with scenarios today that are not, you can't really replicate yesterday. It's not like hindsight from yesterday gives you guideposts to today, because it's a new world. So it was very interesting. But in my experience, the more you experience diverse spectrums of business, the more strength and the more advantage you have, because you understand so much more than anyone else. I mean, I used to laugh. I would say I'm the best person to sit next to on an airplane, even if you don't want to talk, because I've been blessed to be exposed to 1,000+ industries, real industries, not just doing a keynote, but working on the front lines of capitalism. So I can engage people and ask questions no one's ever asked them, and track with them and stimulate connectivity they've never thought about. And I'm learning all the time. But I think hopeless curiosity is one of the most powerful attributes, skills, power sources an individual can have if he or she channels it in the right direction and tries to really understand and process what they're observing, seeing, learning, what's driving things happening. And I was blessed. I wasn't formally trained, but I was like you come across very vivacious and pure and open to learning. And I was that way when I was young, and everybody took me under the wing because I wasn't a threat. I tell people this is a true story. I worked all night for 3 years and just drudgerous types of jobs so I could sit in the offices of some really stunning entrepreneurs in Indianapolis and watch them do business. And they found me so fun and interesting and charming and just inexplicably just intriguing that they'd let me watch something. And when a call was done or a meeting was done, they would tell me what happened and the psychology. And I just, like a sponge, soaked it up. And then you fast forward, I've had some of the greatest mentors in the world, the former, the late Stephen M.R. Covey was one. I've had a collaborative relationship with Tony Robbins for 30 years. I was collaborating with one of the founders of FedEx. I can go back much past a lot of your viewers' probably childhood, but I just had wonderful people that taught me pieces of the puzzle, and not in big forms like that, but in very, very cool, granular, contextual ways that made it come alive and dimensionalized it and animated it so I understood it at such a deeper level.
It's super interesting how you created your career and got all these experiences. So I guess one question I have for you about that is, you worked many jobs at a time. Did that ever become a conflict when you were working for other people? And did you consciously make the decision to go from industry to industry to industry? Or did that just happen and then you realized that you like getting experiences in new industries?
I'm going to answer retrospectively because I don't know retroactively. I've never thought about it deeply, but I think because I'm probably a poster boy for adult attention deficit, and I have a very either a high or a low boredom level, I can't sit in any one environment very long. And I found that I was obsessed with learning the quintessence of what drove a business or a category inside a business. But once I understood it, my attitude was beyond a certain point, it was incremental. And I think I naturally, of all my life, defaulted towards trying to operate in what I call the exponential zone in everything, where everything I was doing was going to produce a sort of an asymmetric yield for me or whoever I was helping. But it never was a conflict, although it was funny. In the early days, you're too young to know this, but in the late 70s, they re-legalized gold. And so you couldn't buy gold for a period of time. It was illegal. Then they legalized it, and people were buying gold bullion, and they were buying gold coins, and they were buying rare coins. They were buying gold stocks and all this stuff. And I was in the gold business, and we had one client it was very cool. We took him from 300,000 to 500 million in about a year and a half. But they were doing one type of selling. They were selling what's called physical delivery, where you just deliver it. And I wanted to do more things. I wanted to compete against ourselves, and they wouldn't. So I picked up, because I was always being paid for results, never paid for time. So nobody had I had no obligation to anything, including exclusivity, actually, because I was only getting paid a fraction of what I made them. So I never would allow it to be exclusive. So when I couldn't get one gold company to do it another way, one was bank finance, one was, I had all kinds of different interests. And I finally found I had at one time 5 different companies doing 5 different types of gold and rare coin and gold stock and collectibles at the same time, because each one wanted to just be one part of the puzzle. And so that was fun, but I've never had a conflict. And it's even funny, with all truth, most people won't even, everybody wants me to sign initially a confidentiality, but I have a mutual one. And because I've been exposed to so many things, I'll say, sure, I'll sign yours, but you got to sign mine. And I probably know more stuff that you don't, and that I don't. Nobody signs it, which I'm not saying it arrogant. We just, it's just, and then we have a nice conversation because there's a higher level of mutual respect. But no, I've never had a problem with any kind of a conflict. I have if you've studied my work and you know that I've done all this work with the strategy of preeminence, I'd like to hope that I operate at a very elevated strata of integrity and ethical and high ethical plane. So I don't do things that, I don't even sell things that I don't like for clients. And I don't sell things if I don't think there's superior value wherever it falls on the pricing or the socioeconomic scheme. But no, I've never, because I've always tried to be true to my ethical beliefs. And so I've never put myself in a position where there would be if I do something that's similar but a different variation, I always apprise the other company and say, look, I gave you first choice and you didn't want to. It's totally different. You're welcome to do it. But no, never been a problem. And I don't think anyone would say that I operate out of integrity. At least I hope they don't.
I'm sure they don't. I didn't mean to insinuate that. So you've been, So you've worked with over 10,000 clients across about 1,000 or so industries.
Yes.
And to me, that is so interesting. The fact that you take strategies from one industry and you bring them to another and you help people maximize their business and disrupt industries. And so I'd love to hear some real concrete examples about bringing one strategy from one industry to another and how you help to elevate a business doing that.
Sure. Well, how about if I start at the beginning and then fast forward? We'll be like a bullet train leaving the tracks, okay?
I love that.
So Icy Hot was my first introduction to the concept of marginal net worth, allowable cost, and 3D thinking. 3D thinking, so we can establish it right now. There's 2 kinds of a business owner, or probably 2 kinds of a P&L-oriented manager. Ones that look at revenue minus expense equal profit. That's a 2D thinker. And ones that think of an asset they are acquiring that keeps producing residual yield. That's 3D thinking. It's sort of the way a PE firm would look at something. So I was introduced, to my great benefit early in my career when we did Icy Hot, to 3D thinking. The man that engaged me bought this old company, Icy Hot, that was almost broke, and it was selling the same composition as the base product you see today, but it was selling it as a mail order product for $3. And it was not doing well. In fact, he was contemplating closing it until he did an analysis and he quantified the performance metrics of the buyers. And what he found, to his delight, was that every time, even though they were almost out of business because they hadn't grown or added new buyers, every time they got a new buyer, every time they got 10 buyers who paid $3, 8 of them would buy a jar or more every month ad infinitum until somebody came up with a cure for arthritis, bursitis, rheumatism. But of the 8, 4 of them would buy some other product concurrently in the line. And of the 4, I'm summarizing and simplifying it, 2 would buy twice a year or more bulk. But bottom line was, every time he brought in 10 new first-time buyers at $3, even though 2 that didn't buy ever again, each one was worth $50 in revenue, which was high profit every year. Mm-hmm. And with that piece of distinction, he didn't have any marketing budget. You're a marketer, I'm a marketer. He gave me the task of going to radio stations, television stations, publications. This is pre-internet. There was no digital media. People that sold products, to stick things in the packages with them and persuade them, whenever they had unsold advertising or underutilized capacity, run ads for us or inserts for us, selling our product for $3. And we let them keep not the $3, but $3.15, which was more than anybody else was. And we let them not only keep that money, but actually have the money go to them. All we cared about was they rushed us the name so we could fulfill promptly, so we could get the second order. And we analyzed it. Even though we were technically losing, the product cost us about 55 cents in the mail. This was long ago, and it was very cheap to make and ship bulk rate. But even though we were losing 55 cents to do all this, we were getting our repeat orders, half of them within 10 days. So our cash flow was great. And by understanding that and being a relatively persuasive at that point salesman, we were able to get 1,000 plus radio, television, newspapers, magazines to run ads for us continuously. And we went from a few thousand buyers to over 500,000 in less than a year. But that wasn't the best part of it. It was a mail order company. And back then, a mail order company was worth much less than a consumer products company selling through distribution. Today, e-commerce is more valuable. But we accidentally got what would today be about $150 million worth of free advertising we didn't pay for, which forced retail distribution, which means people would go to their stores, their grocery, their drug, and ask for it. They didn't have it. They'd call us. We in 15 months, we sold the business that we bought for almost nothing, 20, 30,000 for 60 million to a pharmaceutical company that resold it again. And now I don't know who's got it today. But that wasn't even the most interesting thing. Talk about linear thinking. The pharmaceutical company that bought it only thought in terms of consumer products. They had no interest in the 500,000 buyer database, nor did they have any interest in the over 1,000 media performance only distribution channel we had built. We got to keep all that, and all we were prohibited to do was sell a comparable type of an arthritis product. So we went right back, and that was my first experience. And as I got older, I realized even that was flawed, because if you understand yield and you understand that every time you get 10, you get 8 forever, and every one of the 8 plus the other 2 are worth $50 a year, even if we didn't have the cash, we could have paid out up to $49 in the first year to get a buyer and still made $1 a buyer in year one and $50 in year two and $50 in year three, and probably done a more explosive, but I didn't understand allowable cost and marginal net worth. That was the first thing. The next thing I did that was very interesting.
Can I pause you right there? There's one lesson I want to drill out here, and that's you employed something you call a host beneficiary relationship in that scenario. So basically you partnered with these radio stations and these TV stations, and you said, hey, I'll give you the profit from the first order if we can have the rest of the order. So it was a win for them. You got the free ad space, they got the first sale, and then you got the repeat customer. So talk to us a little bit about what a host beneficiary relationship is, so my listeners know more about that specific strategy.
Yeah, I'm impressed with you because you're very gently steering the dialogue to things that I think are very relevant. So the concept of host beneficiary has many permutations: JV, strategic alliance, power partnering, endorsement, co-branding. I've been privileged that either myself or my colleagues and I have engineered billions of dollars this, but the concept is someone else always has direct, trusted, credible access to the same buying influence you want to reach. That someone has spent a lot of time, money, effort building that credibility. If you can figure out who that someone or some entity or some anything, media, association, influencer, author, doesn't matter, is, and you can persuade them of your deservedness and you can structure the deal right, you can get them to take your product service to their audience. And if you do it masterfully, it's not a static thing like today they do, what do they call it? People that are affiliate, and it's usually a one-time static promotion. But if you do it right, you become a permanently ensconced part of their whole business. I can tell you some stories like that. And you're getting a free ride off of tens, hundreds of millions of dollars of cumulative investment they've made in effort, people, advertising, facilities, technology, service people, product development, all this. And they associate and ascribe their trust and credibility to you. The easiest example I can make is a story that is told by different ways, but it's told mostly about Baron Rothschild, the wealthy investment person in France, that somebody supposedly wanted Baron Rothschild to lend them $100,000 years ago. And he said, I won't lend you a penny, but I'll do something infinitely better. I will walk hand in hand or arm around you back and forth twice across the stock exchange. And when we're done, people will loan you all the money you want. But that's the story of that. To give you very specific, I'll give you a couple quick examples. I won't get into detail, or I can. So I told you I had an investment firm. It was in the gold business. We went from 300,000 to 500 million. We did it by not paying for any advertising. I made strategic alliances with every financial newsletter, every investment seminar company, every publisher of books direct to investment consumers, and we became the recommended provider. We didn't just ask for a single promotion. We became part of their welcome package when they got a new subscriber or buyer. We created quarterly special edition newsletters we would pay to send out. We would organize in their name events in the market. We would underwrite even their marketing to grow their market because we got joint tenancy of the name. We did all kinds of things, but we exploded in the gold business. When I was in the seminar business, it was pretty significant. I was about your age, and we did $250 million, $250 million in 3 years. And I spent a total fixed cost of $300,000, but I did. Tony Robbins partnered with me, Success Magazine, Nightingale Conant, that used to be the biggest audio publisher, 50 different newsletters partnered with me. The in-flights partnered with me, and I only paid them a share of the people that registered. And because we were able to get such credibility, when I started, the average seminar was $500, and we were selling them for $15,000 and $20,000 and selling them out. That's the power of credibility. It ascribes automatic integrity and unique supreme value. A more fascinating one. I used to do seminars 4 times a year, very expensive ones in China, and I did them for 15 years. And the first time I did it, very fascinating. It's all through translation. At the end, we would do Q&A. A young man comes to the mic, and he very sincerely says in his question, Jay, what do you do if your business is too small and the banks won't lend you money to grow? And I said, okay, well, tell me more. And he said, well, I'm a small local motorcycle manufacturer. Now, only in a country like China, where you have 100 million population city, would you be a local motorcycle manufacturer? And he said, I want to try to raise the money to go all over Asia and then find a manufacturing facility there, open offices in all the countries, hire salespeople, recruit dealers. And so I'm going, okay, but what's the problem? And the guy's getting irritated. He goes, I told you I can't get the money. And I said, you don't need the money. You really don't. Your problem is always, or your goal is always the solution to somebody's bigger problem. You just have to figure out what it is. And I said, go all over Asia, find somebody in a non-competitive complementary business that's got a huge underutilized production, has salespeople, offices, dealers, and make a partnership. It took me like 30 seconds. I came back 15 months later, true story. The guy did what I said. He came to the mic again. He said, I did what you said. And I didn't remember because very candidly, my whole life is spent solving problems, identifying opportunities, untangling Gordian knots. I said, well, tell me what I told you. And he told me. I said, what'd you do? He said, I went over Asia. When I got to Kuala Lumpur, I found Asia's largest lawnmower manufacturer. They had a massive second shift they weren't using. They made a deal where they provided the people. I just had to bring the tools and dies. And if you don't know what those are, I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about your listeners or viewers. They're the metal that forges the parts and the assemblies that make the whatever you're making. He said they had salespeople and offices in, I don't remember, 10 countries. They had thousands of dealers. In our first year together, we both made $10 million for almost no investment. That's the kind of power in this. I'll tell you one more story. It's a true one. It's fascinating. Many, many years ago, the insurance company Colonial Penn was started to focus on group type policies, organizations, associations, and they were struggling and they were having a lot of trouble. And after a couple of years of struggling, one of their directors was brilliant. And he said, look, if we can't get an organization to endorse us, why don't we start our own? And they started AARP, the American Association of Retirement People, so they'd have a client. And they did billions of dollars. Subsequently, the government made them have to, they had to basically remove themselves because they had a monopoly on it, but they created billions of dollars by having their own client who endorsed them. But I can give you thousands of examples. We've done it mostly at a larger scale, but I mean, now McDonald's will partner with Disney. You said everyone partners at, I was young enough or old enough, I can remember when you were, in a grocery and they didn't have banks, they didn't have subways. I can remember the same on highways, but now people have figured out that you get all this advantage by taking advantage of someone else's. So the question always to ask is, what do people buy before, during, after, instead? What is similar but not competitive? And when you ask those questions, you get macro answers. Then you look up companies in those fields, and then you start figuring out how you can give them advantage. And if you understand things like I said, if you have a product that sells many times and you understand you don't have to play a front end game, you can play a much more sophisticated, strategic, long-term game. You can do all kinds of things. I hope that answers your question. I got lots more examples.
It does. This is such an interesting topic to me because I feel like it's so underutilized. A lot of entrepreneurs feel like they've got to do everything on their own and they've got their eyes closed to all of these collaboration opportunities that are available to them. I love the example that you gave with McDonald's. So a company like Disney is going to offer free toys to McDonald's so they can promote their movies. McDonald's customers are happy. They get a toy and their Happy Meal, and Disney's happy because they're promoting their show. So it's a win-win for everyone. I guess my last question on this topic is, what are the types, you were alluding to them, but what are the types of questions that you should ask yourself when you're trying to find that right company to partner with? I think a big one is, if a company has the same audience as you, but they're not your competitor, then how can you team up with them? What benefits can you provide them?
I don't want to challenge it, but you could even team up with somebody who's a competitor. When I was in the seminar business, we taught a certain methodology and system for growing a business, and it was very powerful, but it wasn't the only. And after people bought everything I had to sell, I would go out and find people that had really cool alternative means. And I would go to my database and say, look, I taught you what I know, but it's not the only way. You can build on it. You have certain things that are going to work better in different scenarios. And we sold tons of our competitors. But if you ask yourself, okay, as I said, who sells to my audience in a related form? That's the first question. Then who sells to my audience in an unrelated form? Because you might find somebody that's not even logical, but has the audience you want. I mean, during COVID, for example, there were all these high-end, really top, Michelin type independent restaurants that couldn't do anything, and they were dying. And I helped a bunch of them that had some of the most amazing clientele, but had nothing to sell because they couldn't open. And we structured deals with them where they introduced them to luxury car dealers, and they introduced their clients to jewelers and private villas because people only wanted to travel there, and they made tons of money and survived just because they never thought about that correlation, if that makes sense. But you figure out who already has a trusted access directly and credibly to your audience. How can you figure out how to directly or indirectly? Directly means go right at it for an offer. Indirectly means educate, value, create, do whatever you're going to do. And then how can you make it worth their while, either economically, psychically, value add? We've done deals where we went to people and said, as you said, with the toys, we'll give you a massive bonus. You can give and add, advantage to what you sell, particularly if what you sell seems like a commodity. Now it's a proprietary because we're giving you something that would cost us $10 and you're not paying anything, or cost us $20. And we did it because we knew that every time we gave away $10 or $20 to 10 people, 5 of them would come back and buy something for 100 or 200 or 500 over and over again. But you have to understand strategically, you have to understand what I'd call consequential or critical thinking. And most people aren't really skilled in that.
Yeah. Jay is the real deal. Like, I interview expert after expert after expert. And when I was reading Jay's stuff, I just kept getting so excited because it's not that it's so complex, but it's just so good in terms of the strategies. They're so actionable. And that's what we're all about here at Young and Profiting Podcast. So the next piece of wisdom that I want to get from you is something that really excited me. And that's your strategy of preeminence. And for me, when I read your material on that, I was thinking, oh my gosh, this is what I've been doing with YAP Media, but I just never knew it. And now I can kind of fine tune and actually give some direction to what I was doing. So for my listeners who don't know, strategy of preeminence is all about becoming the preeminent choice in your industry. So being the one who is like, there's no other better option. You are the best option for your clients. So I definitely want to stay on this topic for a while, dig deep. First of all, what does a preeminent business look like?
Well, it's interesting. The preeminent business is seen in whatever category: high price, low price, product, commodity, not commodity, product, service, as the only viable choice you can make. If it has any correlation to guide you, it's the most trusted advisor, the go-to source that you would turn to for life, for yourself and anyone else you would refer to them. And it's I should probably give you a history real quickly, because I wish I could say it was original. I had a discussion earlier with a really cool guy there's a guy that has a company called EOS, and he's really interesting. And we're talking about the fact that I don't believe there are as many original thinkers, but I think there's some very original synthesizers, and I would call myself a synthesizer who can take filaments and weave it into a fresh fabric. So I had a client 25 years ago that was in the publishing business, and their business was 3 times larger than their closest competitor. They charged 50 to 100% more. They had far more repeat and multi-buyers, and they ended up selling it, I'm talking about decades ago, for $650 million, which was a lot. And when I was introduced to them, I exchanged them. My fees are very high. You probably know that. I traded them $500,000 of my time for the privilege. And I learned that this is the greatest investment. Most people don't understand that you can get such explosive understanding that can be monetized by exchanging with people whatever you got for the privilege to pick their mind openly and not covertly. And I spent a week interviewing everybody that was critical in the business, the CEO, the architect of their philosophy, their executives, their managers. And I took literally thousands of pages of notes, and I distilled it into what I call the strategy Preeminence. And it starts with this belief that you want to be the most trusted advisor, the only possible source they could turn to, and that the only way you can do that is by caring more, doing more, being more in the eyes of the audience. And you can't do that if you're not willing to, first of all, understand, examine, understand, appreciate, acknowledge, recognize, and really go deep to understand who, what, why, how your audience is, and not just superficially, but see them beyond just a transaction, but as a human being. The next is you have to have a positioning that is distinctive, not the same thing everyone else is. You have to have a point of view that animates their spirit and gets them thinking differently, whether it's more depth or whether it's a different take. You've got to be willing, and gets really interesting, to never allow anybody to buy more than they should or less than they should, in less quantity, quality combination than they should, not because you're going to lose money, but because you're always guiding and advising them as their most trusted advisor in what's going to give them the best outcome for what they're doing. And sometimes letting them buy less is bad. I used an example when I did seminars, and I'll use this. Can you see this? It's a half-filled bottle of water. Mm-hmm. If you had a bottled water shop and a water bar, and I came in and wanted to buy 1/2 bottle of water, or 1/2 glass, let's say half glass, and you sold it to me without first making sure that I knew that I needed 7.5 more of those each and every day to keep my brain functioning, my cellular structure working, my mind balanced and grounded, my stress level down, my system flowing, excreting, peeing, all those things. And you let me do it without making sure I was aware you wouldn't be preeminent. You would be opportunistic. Now, it doesn't mean I have to do it. If you sold me eight glasses, but I only came every 2 days, and you didn't do the same to make sure in between I was aware that you can't save those 8 glasses, you would be stealing from me. The next thing is you have to put into words feelings, thoughts, aspirations, intentions that the prospective buyer has never felt or experienced before. And if you ask me to tell you my Amazon.com School of Business, I'll tell you that it's very cool. The next is you have a moral responsibility, a privilege, and an opportunity, if you really are operating at a higher level and you're bringing a higher level of value, caring, protection, enhancement, whatever your product or service delivers, to not let the person not buy from you if they should, and not buy from your competitor, not because the competitor is a so-and-so, but because the client will be disserved. I use the word client very, very purposely. Most people call someone they do business with a customer. Mm-hmm. If you look up the Webster's definition, can't talk, of a customer, it's someone who buys a commodity or a service. if you call me a customer, what you're saying between the lines is I'm no better than everyone else, and I'm lucky as hell that I get the business that you favor me because I have no value beyond just happenstance and fortuitous good fortune, my location, or us crossing paths. That's not what you want. If you call me a client, even if you're a professional and you're dealing with patients, a patient's definition is below a client. A client is someone under the care, the protection, the well-being of another. You communicate. Oh, by the way, you have three kinds of clients, and we're talking to entrepreneurs, business owners, also managers. One and certainly are the ones that pay you, but the other two are the ones you pay. Mm-hmm. Your team members, employees, your vendors and advisors. Most, and today I think it's changed, but most entrepreneurial business people try to squeeze everything they can out of their team instead of trying to grow and develop everything they should. But the more you grow and develop, the more loyal, the harder working, the more valuable they become. So it's a mindset. You use metaphors and similes to make your points because that's neuro-linguistically how the mind works. I'm trying to remember, I haven't done this for so long, but that's a good start. Does that help?
Yeah, that totally helps. So I do want to stick on this clients versus customers and just kind of drive home some points for my listeners. So first of all, the strategy of preeminence, it's about serving your clients, not selling to them. And you never, like you said, you don't want to sell them too much or too little. You want to actually advise them to do the best thing for them. You want to be their advisor, whether there's monetary gain to that or not. And you want to be a good advisor to them while they're doing business with you, before they're doing business with you, and even after they're doing business with you. So talk to us about the importance of keeping that relationship.
And you fall in love with your client. Most people fall in love with the wrong thing. They fall in love with their career or their industry or their company or being the fastest growing. That's not where you attain preeminence. When you fall in love with your client, and you live to see your product or service animated at work in their lives. Even if you were an ice cream vendor in the park, you would see that for 10 or 15 minutes of solace, you give someone who's taking a break from work the chance to go back into their childhood and have a wonderful nostalgic relief and reminiscence. And you take great pride in knowing you're creating that. If you're selling something that's expensive or not, but you know that when it's at work in their life, it's protecting, enhancing, enriching, and entertaining. You live with that kind of a transactional, not transactional, but what would I call it? More of the animation of the product being living and functioning in somebody's life or business. Very, very key distinction. I'm sorry to step on you.
No, I think that's a really great point to drive home. So you talk about your clients as your friends. And this is something that I thought was really interesting because in business, a lot of the times people say separate your business from your personal, but you're pretty adamant about saying that your clients are actually great friends that you have deep relationships with. And I totally align to that. All my clients, I feel like, are my friends, my mentors. I don't have any lines in that way. Talk to us about that and why you think that's a good mindset to have.
If you can't respect them for who they are, what they are, why they are, you can't serve them to any degree of meaningful significance. My wife thinks I'm diabolically just nasty because when I get a prospective client, I will pop into my house with them if we're out to lunch when she's not expecting. Her hair is in a mess and she's in her exercise and she's got stuff on her face. But I want to feel good inviting them to my home, and I want to see if they are real. And because I can't respect them, I can't serve them with full passion and paternalism and care as much, if not more, about them than they do if I can't appreciate and enjoy them, not just as a source of compensation to me, but a source of meaningful stimulation, value, enjoyment, and worth. And if I don't really appreciate them, I can't, and I don't take them, even if they have lots of money to spend, because I know I won't serve them well because it's inauthentic. You have to be, to me, and I think it's true of even a job career. If you're not really passionate, I think there's 3 P's: passion, purpose, possibility. If you're not really passionately committed to not just what you're doing, who you're doing it for, why you're doing it, what doing it for them is going to mean, you can't really super achieve. If you're not a purpose, if you don't have a greater purpose than just making money or making it through the day or getting to the next level, you're not going to be great. And why would you want to be mediocre if you could be great? And if you don't see the possibilities that you uniquely can make catalytically in the interaction you have, whether it's selling somebody, managing somebody, serving somebody, then you're missing huge fulfillment. By the way, when you are preeminent, it's liberating, it's elevating. You're operating at one of the most joyously intoxicating stratas of fulfillment, of interaction, of understanding. And it's like the whole world is a 3D movie and you have arguably the only pair of glasses. So it's quite wonderful. And I just used a metaphor to demonstrate it.
Yeah. And I want to make sure that my listeners understand what preeminence really means. It means that you're no longer knocking on doors to get customers. The customers are coming to you because you're seen as the person. Your clients are referring you because you're doing the best job. You're their trusted advisor. They can't even think about anybody else who could do it better than you. So describe to us what it looks like when you are the preeminent business or person in your industry, because I want people to understand what that means and how can they tell if they have it or they don't.
It means the first thing is that they're in the relationship for a different reason than most everyone else around or comparable. They're in it because they want to make a better contribution. They want to add more value and they understand what value means to the other side. They are not selfless. Most selfish thing you can do is be externally focused because that's going to make it's going to reward you the fastest. It means that you are always telling people the truth, what you feel. It means you are always making yourself aware of whatever you're doing and how it affects everyone else in the food chain. It means that you wake up in the morning thinking how much, if you're dealing with a lot of people as a company selling, how many lives, how many companies are we going to help transform or enhance or protect today? It means that you don't think in terms of how much money it came into the cash register today. You're thinking about how many organizations, individuals did we get the chance to serve? And then you think in terms of service. I have a very interesting, and if you didn't, it's no problem. But one of my first trade books, which is called Getting Everything You Can Out of All You Got, yep. We made a very important point. We said that when people go to a hardware store to buy a drill, they don't really want a drill. They want a hole. And if you think about it, as a consequential thinker, they don't want a hole. They want to fasten something. And they don't really even want to fasten something. They want to watch their 85-inch big screen TV tonight on Netflix, or they want to have the water come out of the new sink, or they want the lock to latch on the back door. And when you live in that kind of a mindset, you possess the purest, a single attribute that people strive for most of their life and never know how to get. And that's absolute ethical advantage over everyone else. But it's pure. It's wonderful. It's recurring. It's perpetual. It's just wonderful. You should be able to tell just by what's evoking. And you're not trying, you've probably had people you interview and they're coyly trying to manipulate the answers in a self-serving way so they can set people up to come to them for some economic gain. You can tell that's not my objective. I have no care one way or the other. My goal here is if I'm going to do this with you, I want to make darn sure that I'm not intellectual entertainment, that I move the people watching, listening, irrespective of whether they're entrepreneurs, executives, CEOs, employees, employers, to a higher level of understanding and thus a higher level of action, transaction, contribution, fulfillment. And that's what being preeminent is all about.
Yeah, I got to say, the strategy of preeminence, if I were you listening in, I would start Googling it, read Jay's articles, read Jay's book, getting everything you can out of all you've got, because it's really powerful stuff. And if you learn how to do this, it's basically learning human behavior in business and how to use your human behavior in business to do the right thing, serve your clients, but also, generate leads without really trying that hard, because you just become the best option in the market. So I think that's really powerful.
Great. And if you want, I have a very enlightened attitude at this point in my life. If anything that I have on that serves your people, I'll give it to you. You can put it on your website.
Thank you.
You can put a book that's got it. You can put a keynote I did on it. You can put mini instructions, and I don't need to get linked on it. It all comes back. It all comes back.
Thank you, Jay. Appreciate that. So let's talk about another strategy that you talk about pretty often, which is all about increasing your clients. And it's the difference between the Parthenon method and the diving board method. And this has to do with your marketing channel. So the diving board method is really having one channel. It's basically like a floppy diving board. There's ups and downs, booms and busts. It's not really the best approach. And then the Parthenon method is all about having multiple channels. So if you guys know what the Parthenon is, it's these Greek structures that you might have seen in your history books with, 5 different columns. It's pretty sturdy. They last for thousands of years. And you really want to go with a multi-channel approach. So talk to us about the importance of multi-channel approaches with your lead generation and why you believe in the Parthenon method.
You started off, most businesses, ironically, they generate most of their revenue from one source. And sometimes it's a passive source like word of mouth. And if anything happens to compromise that, you can't, people can't come to your store. You can't, gas prices are too expensive. The airlines aren't flying. The airlines are flying, but nobody's in their office. You're pretty screwed if that's the only source of revenue you're generating, or if you were just doing trade show booths during the worst of the pandemic. What I found, which is very interesting, because I used to do this as an object lesson, when we used to have 1,000 people in a seminar, I would say, okay, how many people generate their business from salespeople, either captive or contract? And they'd stand, okay, sit down. How many do it from, back then, direct mail? How many do it from social media? How many do it from Facebook and social media? Sit down. How many do it from LinkedIn? Sit down. YouTube, sit down. And when I was done, I'd say, isn't it interesting that approximately 10% get all their business from salespeople, and most of you don't have a sales force. 20% get it from this, and you don't do that. What would happen if you added that to what you're doing, where you're getting 100% of your business from one thing? If it was only 10 or 15% more, depending on the business, sometimes, interestingly, that incremental revenue can double or triple your profit, particularly if you don't have a lot of corresponding fixed overhead. But more importantly, it leverages your advantage many ways. The first way is it lets you penetrate your market in different access vehicles that you're not getting from one thing. Second, a lot of people, depends on the type of product service you're selling, but the more expensive or the more abstract or the more conceptual, it takes many different touches. Most people try to get those touches through one mechanism, but if you're touching me from many vantage points, if you have a sales force, if you're doing social media, if you email, if you're doing endorsements, if you're running ads on podcasts, and you're doing all these, some of them don't even have to make money. They can break even, but strategically benefit the whole of it. But you haven't introduced my 3-way to grow a business, but it's the ultimate exercise in working on the geometry of a business, because you increase 3 different categories, 10% each, and it's 33% increase in revenue. But if you doubled all 3, it would be at 800%. It seems a little confusing, but back to the Power Parthenon, if you have one revenue source, and I get you to have 7 or 8 more, and each one's only 5% more here, 8% more here, 10% here, 3%. That combination is not 8 or 10, it's more like hundreds of percent, number one. Number two, you're going to get people that you haven't been able to reach from the other ones. Number 3, you're going to be moving people who aren't yet compelled, because there's a great, a friend of mine named, I don't remember her name now. Shoot, she did all the stuff for Salesforce, and they figured there's 4 or 5 categories of people who are.
Tiffany Bova?
No, geez. Oh, Mary Lou Tyler. Do you know her?
Mm-mm.
Really great person. And they wrote a book called Predictable Revenue, but they figured out there's 4 different categories of people. I think one is, capable but not interested yet, interested but not, decisive, interested, but indecisive, but not committed, all these things. But you're moving and you're reaching them from different vantage points. If those of you who have ever studied military warfare, and I'm not trying to be a negativist, but the military uses the quintessential understanding of this in what is called force multiplier effect. Simply put, if you and I were at war and I wanted to win, what I would do is I would use a continuous, I would access you and I would penetrate your country from as many different concurrent vantage points as possible. I would knock out your infrastructure, your roads, your airports, your rails, your ports. I would knock out your communication, probably with surface to air missiles. Then I would do bombs. Then I would do maybe attack drones. Then I would do maybe tanks. And then I might do infantry. And all I cared about was I won the war. But if you understand that the leverage in going after your market from many different expanded approaches, then everything in business, whether you like it or not, it's who's got advantage, isn't it? There's a funny saying: if you have 99 ways to say no, and I have 100 ways to get you to say yes, and we stay in dialogue long enough, I win. But most people don't understand. Whatever you do in your life, job, career, profession, business, finance, you want to be engaged in those actions, activities, moves, and maneuvers that have the highest ethical probability of giving you massive advantage. Isn't that right? Mm-hmm. So I've just learned to operate in a world where you have massive advantage over everybody else.
So you tease this out. So I want to make sure that we can cover it for my listeners. A lot of people think that there's like hundreds of ways to increase revenue and profit in a business, but you really say there's 3 main ways. What are those 3 main ways?
Yeah, it's easy. You increase the number of buyers, you increase the size of the transaction, and thus the profit that transaction yields. And then you increase the frequency or utility value of transactions. So more buyers, higher sales per transaction, more transactions, longer. If you do just one of those, it's an incremental growth. But if you do all 3 together and you increase them, it's a geometric growth. There's probably 30 ways in each of those categories that most people wouldn't even think about. But I'll give you the most hilarious thing that I have discovered in my work, and it's something that's close to my heart. So if you had, again, use our hypothetical, 1,000 people in a seminar room who were entrepreneurs or business heads, and you ask them, does any part of your business come from referral or word of mouth? Unless they're a very unique type of business that's so private and personal that nobody would tell anyone else, the odds are that 5%, 10%, sometimes 100% comes. So we would interview the people and say, if at least 20 to 100% of your business comes from referral, word of mouth, stand up. And we'd say, remain standing. And then I would randomly, this is hilarious, I would randomly pick 20. I'd say, okay, tell me the percentage in the dollars. And sometimes it's profound. 100%, $5 million. 40%, 800,000, 30%, $10 million. Then I'd say remain standing now only if you and your business have in place right now at least one formalized, systematized, strategic referral generating approach that everyone uses constantly at appropriate points. 95% of the people that said yes sit down. Then I'd say 2 approaches. 95% of the 5 sit down. 3, they all sit down. Then I'd say, well, we've studied, when you study 1,000 industries, we found 125. They're not all great ones, different referral generating systems or strategies that could be used. But then I'd say, everybody that sat down, raise your hand if you spend any money on salespeople, social media, trade show booths, and almost everybody did. And I'd say, well, let me ask you what's wrong with this picture. I believe that a externally generated lead buyer has very low trust. You got to move them from low trust to sort of trust to committed trust. And even when they buy the first time, they're not totally trusting. They're sort of like that. Whereas a referral generated buyer buys immediately, trusts immediately, negotiates less, buys larger quantities, buys more often, is more interesting and enjoyable to deal with, costs you nothing, and refers more people. So what's wrong with this picture? But I mean, I've been taught by masters to think differently, and I hope this comes across and helps people shift a little bit their mental model and maybe flips their worldview a little bit more towards strategic, consequential, correlated thinking.
Yeah. And that's why this kind of goes back to the strategy of preeminence. When you act as a trusted advisor and always act in the best interest of your clients, they'll happily recommend you to everybody else because they're being a good friend by recommending the best of the best. So one thing that I wanted to ask you, which is a personal question,
Sure.
to be honest, is do you provide some sort of incentive for clients who refer other clients, or do you discount?
I've helped, I've been very blessed. I've helped perhaps 300 A-class experts, authors, trainers, people like Tony and Daymond, and they know that anybody significant they ever want to refer to me, I'll buy them 2 hours of no cost and no self-serving strategy, expert assessment. Everybody knows that. Secondly, I think we tend to almost over contribute when we do anything that is, let's say, sample my methodology or my mindset. We give so much that it's almost unprecedented. And if you go to my website, which I'm not pushing, for 8 years, I didn't even ask for an opt-in because I was disgusted by all the purveyors of hyperbolic shit that, excuse my vulgarity, that we're just trying to get people's. So we operate very differently. I'm very eclectic, probably maybe a little iconoclastic, but I always try to give freely, and I always try to do things that are in the best interest of the client. Last month, for example, I had a very lucrative client that got into trouble, and I have a contract with them, and they were willing to honor it, but it wasn't in their best interest. So I let them out, but I gave them 3 months access just because it was the right thing to do. If you're playing the game at a higher level, you're having a good time, and you're almost intuitively driven and fueled by the ability to resonate and exude far more value. But I don't bribe anyone. In other words, if you said, Jay, if I give you a client, will you give me something? I would say, yes, I'll give you a thank you. Maybe I'll send you a really beautiful, I've got a client that sells $500 boxes of chocolate, but I'm not going to give you money because I don't want it to be induced by anything but your preeminent belief that your client will be better served or your friend will be better served by me. And it doesn't mean that's the best thing to do. And when I hear people go, okay, you mean giving me a kickback? I go, Jesus. I mean, there are strategies where if it's fully disclosed, I've done it for clients where we had people recommend vendors and we told them that we were receiving a modest participation, but in exchange for that, we were that audience's ombudsman. We were negotiating better pricing, better benefits, better protection, risk reversal, and better bonuses. And that if there was any problem or discrepancy, we were there to serve them. But we were not saying that they had to buy that person. We were saying that we represented them in an ethical, fully disclosed manner. But I think integrity is the key to everything.
Yeah. I totally agree. I haven't done that. I was just wondering, because I know that a lot of people want some sort of recurring fee. Some people, like I've gotten some people saying they either want a discount or they want some sort of referring fee for referring people, but I totally am aligned with you. It's kind of just like, if I get a referral, I get a referral.
That doesn't mean I won't serve somebody. I will help almost anybody that wants to help me, and I'll help them even if they don't succeed, if I see that they really went the extra, mile and they truthfully did everything possible and it didn't work out. But I don't believe in compromising my integrity to get business, because I think that if you do that, then you sold out. I want people to come to me just like you seem to, because of the value we represent above and beyond the maddening crowd, and the result, the benefit, the outcome that someone will get. But it doesn't mean I'm unwilling to add value beyond some economic. Now, that's different than if you retain someone whose job it is to find business and give that person
a commission or something. Yeah.
That's a different. If somebody says, yes, I'm representing Jay, my job is to source for him qualified, seemingly compatible companies he can work long-term on and share profits. That's different. I have those. But if somebody just says, hey, Jay, I want to refer a client to you, I would say, I'm thrilled if you're doing it for the right reason. And if I can help you with your business reciprocally, I will be happy to. But I just don't want to compromise what I think I stand for. And a lot of times we think, we see ourselves in a maybe more delusional elevation of significance than we are. But I'd like to hope that I operate in a unique, rarefied, and it sounds like you do too. And it's that's the reason. If people need to be, to be bribed to do what's best to people they care about, they are anything but preeminent. They're not looking out after the best interests. They're looking out avariciously short-term after their own.
I love that. I think that was a great answer. So I know we have about 4 minutes left. And so I do want to ask you the last question, which I ask all of my guests. And that is, what is your secret to profiting in life? And you can take this any direction that you want.
I've been so blessed by people. I've learned that wealth and compensation are denominated in many ways, only one of which is financial. So profiting in life means constantly learning. Profiting in life means constantly contributing. Profiting in life means being able to associate with really interesting quality people that expand and challenge and enrich you. Profiting in life means that at the end of your life, you can, or whoever is going to speak for you says that was a life well lived in service to others. This is a very simple, but a true, and I got this from somebody else, it's not original. You're rewarded in your life in direct proportion to the quantity, quality, consistency of problems you solve for others and opportunities you make possible. I have hopeless curiosity. I love everyone. And if I tell you one of my favorite things to do when I used to travel all over the world, we would go to Asia all the time. And I had a protocol. And I'll tell you this because maybe it'll be a great conclusion to this conversation. I would always get to go first class on the airline of my choice. And there usually would be an airline with great wines and liqueurs. So I would drink meaningfully. And so the first day I'd get somewhere, I would hydrate and sleep. The second day, I always went 3 or 4 days early. I would go into the lobby of the hotel, normally a nice one, and I would sit in the lobby smiling at people for 4 hours until they smiled back. Then I would get in the elevator and I would stand at the door facing in, not out, smiling until people did the same. And then I would get off on all the floors and walk back and forth, engaging sincerely, respectfully, meaningfully, and appreciatively the housekeepers, even though we didn't speak always the same language, or the servers. And you could tell that they felt acknowledged and I felt great. But I think that somebody taught me one more thing, and they said, if you don't know what you stand for, why you stand for it, who you stand for, what standing for it means, then you have no sense of who you are.
I love that. I think that is so powerful, Jay. You are a legend. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this conversation.
It was great. You asked great questions, and I'm flattered to have been your guest. And I hope that I gave you whatever you were after, and that it has an impact on the people that watch or listen.
Oh, 100% it will. And I can't wait to recap this later on in our outro. So where can our listeners go find everything about you and what you do?
If they are career type people or smaller, we give away better stuff on our Abraham.com than most people sell. So they can go there they can opt in or not. There's, I think, 800 different resources, books and courses and interviews and all kinds of things that will help them. If they're large enough and they want to explore any kind of relationship, go to jay@abraham.com. But and there's plenty of stuff online, and I'll give you anything that Brian connects with you that you want to give your people so they don't have to go there. But yeah, I mean, I'm on a pension at this point in my life. I had another influencer, pretty cool. He said he went through a lot of trauma and he came up with a really great, it was a catharsis that led to a profound transformation. He said his belief is anytime you interact with any person, anybody, for any reason, for any amount of time, your job, your purpose, your opportunity, your privilege is to make the other side better off because you were in their life, even if it's just listening, even if it's a smile. And most people are so self-consumed today that if I can leave with anything, I think it's try to be externally focused. It's much more satisfying, and it's frankly much more enriching in all forms, including financial. Okay.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Everybody tuning in, go to jayabraham.com. I know you have a meeting to head out to, so I'm going to let you go, and let's connect whenever you'd like. Thank you so much, Jay.
Well, thank you. And I appreciate it a lot. You ask great questions, and you have a vivacious, sort of an effervescent, you're intoxicating in the most positive way. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Young and Profiting Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please write us a review or comment on your favorite platform. Nothing makes us happier than reading your reviews. We'd love to hear what you think about the show. And don't forget to share this podcast with your friends, family, and on social media. I always repost, reshare, and support those who support us. You can find me on Instagram at YAP with Hala or LinkedIn. Just search for my name. It's Hala Taha. Big thanks to the YAP team as always. This is Hala signing off.